on Chinese technology firms strengthened Beijing's conviction that long-term dependence on the West carried risks. When two major powers reached the conclusion that the global system works against their core interests, they logically move closer. This convergence is strategic and calculated rather than emotional. Ironically, American preventive measures have sometimes hastened this alignment. Sanctions drove Russia nearer to China, while tariffs encouraged China to seek other partners. Efforts to isolate one only increased the motivation for both to integrate more tightly. This does not imply policymakers in Washington made no valid choices. Russia's actions in Ukraine required responses, and concerns over Chinese industrial strategies are legitimate. Yet geopolitics often produces unexpected outcomes. One major unintended result has been the rapid strategic convergence between Moscow and Beijing. It remains important to avoid overstating the partnership. Russia and China are distinct nations with differing priorities. Underlying tensions persist. China now holds clear economic superiority, positioning Russia as the junior partner in ways few would have predicted earlier. Beijing gains from lower-priced Russian energy and Russia's growing reliance on Chinese buyers. At the same time, China stays wary of entanglement in Russia's conflicts. Russia, for its part, harbors quiet concerns about excessive long-term economic dependence on China. These frictions exist and carry significance, yet shared strategic goals against the prevailing system currently outweigh them. This alignment extends worldwide through forums like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Coordination grows among China, Russia, Iran, and others seeking alternatives to Western dominance. More trade occurs in national currencies. Infrastructure projects link regions across Eurasia. Step by step, a parallel structure takes shape alongside the American-led order. This measured pace is deliberate. Neither country aims to dismantle the existing system abruptly. Instead, they develop enough parallel mechanisms so that global reliance on the current setup gradually decreases. Global power shifts rarely occur through single dramatic events. They result from steady accumulation of small changes that appear manageable alone, but transform the whole over time. One pipeline, one trade pact, one sanctions bypass, one exercise, one new payment method, one diplomatic meeting. Each seems modest separately. Collectively, they reshape power structures. The United States retains substantial strengths. The dollar dominates international finance. American military capabilities remain superior overall. Its universities, innovation ecosystems, capital markets, and alliances stand strong. NATO continues as a vital force, and Pacific partnerships around China hold importance. These advantages do not vanish simply because Russia and China cooperate more closely. However, power requires ongoing maintenance, credibility, and flexibility to endure. While Washington has often addressed issues reactively, Beijing and Moscow appear focused on extended historical horizons spanning decades. Their statements frame the present not as fleeting difficulties, but as the start of a fundamental shift away from American unipolarity. Whether their assessment is accurate matters less than the fact that both leaderships firmly believe it. Nations convinced that history favors them act with greater confidence. This outlook influences investments, military strategies, diplomacy, and willingness to accept risks. It also affects how other countries perceive shifting global balances. Many governments now ponder questions that seemed unlikely a decade ago. What if the future system features multiple competing centers rather than one dominant power? What if Chinese markets, Russian energy, American finance, and other sources become equally relevant? Nations are hedging their positions, diversifying ties, and reducing overdependence on any single actor. This behavior itself speeds the move toward multipolarity. The Russia-China relationship carries importance that stretches well beyond the two capitals because it has become a structural force. It influences how other nations view the evolution of global power. It prompts countries everywhere to consider that the post-1991 American era might not continue indefinitely. Their partnership developed gradually through a series of agreements once dismissed as unimportant, combined with shared external pressures, economic links, strategic needs, and aligned long-term objectives. Analysts first labeled it symbolic, then merely practical, then short-lived. At each stage, the ties proved stronger and more enduring than anticipated. Today, the world faces the fact that these powers have moved past occasional cooperation. They actively support each other's ability to withstand pressure from the existing system while creating viable alternatives. The central question is no longer whether Russia and China are growing closer. That reality is clear. The deeper issue is whether the international community fully recognizes what this closeness aims to achieve. If their partnership follows its present path, the coming decades may not revolve around one leading superpower. Instead, they could involve an extended competition between different concepts of international order. One vision seeks to maintain the system built after the Cold War under American leadership. The other works toward a more fragmented, multipolar arrangement that is less predictable. Leaders in Beijing and Moscow increasingly view this future as already underway. This evolution carries profound implications for global stability and decision-making. As the partnership deepens, it challenges long-held assumptions about how power operates on the world stage. Energy ties create lasting mutual interests that transcend individual leaders. Military coordination demonstrates growing operational trust. Financial shifts reduce vulnerability to external controls. Ideological alignment provides a common narrative that resonates with many nations skeptical of Western approaches. Each element reinforces the others, building resilience and expanding options. Countries observing these changes adjust their own strategies accordingly. Some strengthen existing alliances while quietly exploring new partnerships. Others position themselves to benefit from multiple centers of influence. The gradual nature of these shifts can make them easy to overlook in the midst of immediate crises. Yet, their cumulative effect is reshaping the landscape. Pipelines and trade routes establish physical connections. Alternative institutions create new diplomatic channels. Shared technological development reduces dependence on restricted supply chains. Over time, these practical steps translate into altered power realities. The United States faces the task of responding not just to specific actions, but to this broader trend. Maintaining strengths in innovation, alliances, and economic vitality will be essential. At the same time, understanding the motivations driving closer Russia-China ties can inform more effective long-term policies. Pressure has sometimes unified them further, suggesting that balanced approaches combining firmness with strategic engagement may yield better results. Looking ahead, the trajectory suggests continued deepening unless significant changes occur in the global environment. The partnership offers both nations greater maneuverability and security in an uncertain world. For Russia, it provides economic outlets and diplomatic backing. For China, it supplies resources, strategic depth, and a partner in challenging established norms. Together, they accelerate the development of parallel systems that could one day offer genuine alternatives. This does not mean the American-led order will disappear quickly. Its institutions, networks, and advantages remain formidable. However, the emergence of credible options introduces new dynamics. Nations gain leverage through choice. Global rules become subject to negotiation among multiple players. The era of unchallenged primacy gives way to a more contested space. Such transitions test adaptability across all major actors. Success will depend on foresight, resilience, and the ability to shape outcomes rather than merely react. The story of Russia and China illustrates how shared perceptions of threat and opportunity can transform international relations. What began as cautious engagement has matured into a comprehensive strategic alignment. Its development reflects patient construction over years, turning potential rivals into partners. As this process continues, it invites reflection on the nature of power itself. Power today rests not only on military or economic size, but on connections, adaptability, and the capacity to build systems that endure. In the end, the partnership between Moscow and Beijing stands as a defining feature of the current era. It signals shifting currents beneath the surface of daily events. Understanding its depth and direction provides essential insight into the forces shaping the coming decades. The world is transitioning toward greater complexity, where imagine two of the world's most powerful leaders standing side by side, declaring that their country's relationship has reached its highest point in history. Just days after the United States announced fresh technology limits on China, Vladimir Putin joined Xi Jinping in Beijing with that bold statement. Many dismissed it as standard diplomatic talk, the kind of scripted moment meant for cameras and headlines. Yet, beneath the surface, something far more significant was unfolding. While the world focused on tariffs, elections, sanctions, and daily political drama, the two largest authoritarian powers were forging a partnership deeper and more integrated than anything seen since the Cold War. This connection goes beyond short-term convenience. It represents the careful building of an alternative center of global power, one shaped for a future where American dominance is no longer assured. To truly grasp where global power dynamics are heading over the next 2 decades, it is essential to examine why Russia and China are drawing closer than ever before. This bond is no longer reactive or temporary. It has evolved into a strategic framework designed to challenge the existing order. Understanding its roots requires looking back far beyond recent events in Ukraine, sanctions, or leadership changes in Washington. The story begins with the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. Russia emerged from that era weakened, its economy in ruins, its pride wounded, and its influence diminished. China at that time was still years from its current economic strength. The notion of Moscow and Beijing uniting against the United States felt unlikely. Historical distrust lingered between them. Russia worried about Chinese population growth near its borders, and past military clashes along their shared frontier during the Cold War added to the tension. Western observers saw too many conflicting interests and old suspicions for any real alliance to form. History, however, often shifts gradually before accelerating. In July 2001, Putin and Chinese President Jiang Zemin signed the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. At the time, much of the West overlooked it as mere symbolism filled with vague commitments. What went unnoticed was how this agreement established a crucial foundation. It was not yet a formal alliance, but it created a flexible mechanism allowing both nations to expand cooperation without immediately provoking the United States by forming an open military bloc. This careful approach let the partnership develop quietly while others underestimated its potential. Over time, the relationship strengthened steadily at first, then accelerated. Putin made frequent visits to China. Energy deals between their companies grew in scale. Military ties expanded through joint exercises that became increasingly sophisticated. Their diplomatic positions at the United Nations aligned more closely. Still, many in the West viewed this purely transactional. Russia sought revenue, while China needed reliable energy supplies. The common assumption held that necessity drove their cooperation, not a shared long-term vision. That judgment proved to be one of the major strategic miscalculations of the 21st century. What truly drew them together was a growing sense of shared pressure from the same source. Both came to see the American-led international system not just as competitive, but as one intended to limit their rise permanently. NATO's eastward expansion signaled to Moscow that Western influence would keep advancing toward Russian borders. In Asia, U.S. alliances suggested to Beijing that strategic encirclement was underway. Events like color revolutions, sanctions, technology barriers, and democracy initiatives reinforced the belief in both capitals that Washington was not merely a rival within the system, but the architect of the system itself. If Russia and China sought true independence, they realized they would need to construct a counterbalance together. The year 2014 marked a turning point with the annexation of Crimea. When Western sanctions struck the Russian economy on a large scale, Moscow pivoted eastward with renewed determination. European markets suddenly appeared unreliable. Russian leaders understood that depending solely on Western trade and finance carried too much risk. China recognized the opening and moved quickly. Beijing offered investments, expanded trade, technology transfers, and energy agreements that helped shield Russia from full isolation. Cooperation evolved into deeper dependence, which in turn developed into strategic integration. The Power of Siberia pipeline stood as a powerful symbol of this change. This vast energy link connected Russian gas fields directly to Chinese markets, binding their economies for decades ahead. Its importance extended beyond commerce into geopolitics. Each unit of Russian gas heading east reduced reliance on Europe and lowered vulnerability to Western leverage. Energy formed the sturdy backbone of their ties because it created lasting structures. Governments and leaders may change, but pipelines, infrastructure, and supply chains endure. When major powers weave their economies together in this structural way, undoing those connections becomes extremely challenging. Then, on February 4, 2022, just weeks before the invasion of Ukraine, Putin visited Beijing for the Winter Olympics. There, he and Xi Jinping announced a partnership with no limits and no forbidden areas of cooperation. Such precise language carried great weight from two disciplined governments. It signaled that their relationship had advanced far beyond simple deals into something more profound and ambitious. When the Ukraine conflict began, expectations in the West pointed toward Russia's global isolation. Instead, China emerged as a vital economic lifeline. Trade volumes surged dramatically. Russian oil, rejected by Europe, found ready buyers in China at favorable rates. In return, Chinese electronics, machinery, semiconductors, and dual-use technologies reached Russia through networks crafted to evade sanctions. Trade between them increasingly moved away from the US dollar toward the yuan and ruble. This shift holds deeper meaning because American influence relies heavily on the dollar's central role in global finance. Every transaction bypassing the dollar chips away at that advantage gradually. The partnership's true significance lies not only in its current form, but in its direction and future potential. Bilateral trade has more than doubled since the war's start. Chinese energy purchases from Russia keep climbing. Joint military drills have grown in scope, with bombers patrolling near US, allies in the Pacific, and naval exercises spanning from the Arctic to the South China Sea. Intelligence sharing has reportedly increased. While China has avoided large-scale direct arms supplies, it has delivered sufficient technological and industrial backing to help Russia withstand sanctions. This measured support reveals Beijing's thoughtful strategy. China prefers Russia not to collapse, but also avoids provoking early full-scale economic conflict with the West. Beijing acts with precision, offering enough assistance to maintain Moscow's resilience without crossing lines that would force premature decoupling. This approach reflects strategic patience, a hallmark of modern Chinese foreign policy. Beyond trade and military matters, the partnership carries ideological weight. Russia and China now use similar language to describe global affairs. Both portray the current order as unfairly dominated by the United States. They view Western efforts to promote democracy as meddling in internal matters. They criticize sanctions applied outside United Nations approval and advocate for a multipolar system where power spreads among several major centers instead of concentrating in Washington. The term multipolar appears repeatedly in their joint statements as the guiding idea of their collaboration. It envisions a world where American sanctions lose effectiveness due to alternative financial pathways. It supports expanding groups like BRICS to rival Western institutions. It aligns with China's Belt and Road Initiative, reshaping trade routes across vast regions. In this setup, nations facing Western pressure can turn to Beijing and Moscow for support, investment, arms, and economic options. Most crucially, it challenges America's ability to set global rules alone. This broader vision connects all their joint efforts, aiming not for sudden replacement of the United States, but for ending the assumption that America must always occupy the system's center. Recent developments have sped up this process. The sanctions campaign against Russia delivered China a clear warning. Beijing observed how quickly Western powers froze assets, cut off banks, restricted technology, and used financial tools as weapons. Leaders there understood that similar measures could one day target China. This insight heightened efforts towards self-reliance in semiconductors, new payment systems, greater use of the yuan, and secure supply chains. The Ukraine war served as a real-world example for China of how economic conflict against a major power unfolds. Meanwhile, each new U.S. restriction